welcome back, everybody, to the next block of discussions in the Science Business Annual Conference. A warm welcome, of course, to our online audience who are joining us for the session that's going to discuss Industry Unleashed. What will it take to really transform corporate innovation and investment in Europe in the years to come? The framing, I think, is quite obvious. It's a perennial challenge that we discuss here in Europe. It was the same issue 40 years ago, how to get industry engagement and investment somehow consolidated in a European context to boost industrial competitiveness, to create jobs, to inspire innovation. And now, of course, 40 years later, we ask some of the same questions, albeit in a radically changed geopolitical context. So again, in the spirit of the discussions that we're having here today, we're looking ahead to FP10 in part. But in this session, we're also thinking about the framework around framework. Right? What are the key enabling conditions, the incentives, the steps that can be taken by policymakers at EU level and at national level to ensure that Europe remains a desirable, sustainable location for industry R&D investment and innovation in the years to come? Okay? So that's the broader context of what we're talking about. So it's not limited to FP, it's a bit more about the macro environment. But to do this, I'm delighted to be joined by a very eminent panel of guests, and we're going to talk through a number of different issues about the way that certain policy developments, pieces of legislation, are shaping the way that companies, leading European companies, think about their long-term R&D strategy. In that context, I'm delighted to have Karin Condé-Kneip, who's the Senior Vice President for Global Drug Discovery at Novo Nordisk, and Ina Sebastian, Vice President for Research and Development and Innovation Policy at Infineon Technologies. And we're also going to talk about the broader policy environment where EU, national, regional boundaries are drawn, where the lines of responsibility for creating the right environment for industry investment can lie. And then also how the science ecosystem can possibly evolve to create some more of the enabling conditions like knowledge valorization or more, which again amplify the impact of industry investment in R&D in Europe for the betterment of society in the years to come. And on those two particular points, we have Robert Jan Smits, who many of you will know as the former Director General of RTD at the European Commission, and for the last 3 years, President of the Executive Board at TU Eindhoven, and Tor Grande, who is newly installed as Rector ad interim at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. So we're going to run this as quite an interactive discussion. We're going to do our best to get some questions from you in the audience. I'll give you a heads up a couple of minutes before we give you the stage, so you have time to think about something provocative, constructive, or challenging to ask. But I'm going to get the discussion going, first of all, with our industry perspectives, and first to Karin. So, as I think most of you are aware, Novo's one of Europe's fastest growing and most valuable companies in a pretty important and high-profile sector these days, pharmaceutical and drug discovery. The sector itself is one of the, I think it might even be the biggest net contributor to Europe's trade surplus. So the R&D boundaries in Europe are critical, I think, for companies like Novo and indeed a number of your competitors. So when you look at the landscape today and then projecting out 5 or 10 years, how do you formulate your research and development strategy for Europe? What are the key aspects that underpin the value case for Novo as a leading European company to continue to invest here?
Yes, and thank you for the question, and a pleasure to be here. I think it's quite important to understand where are we from a pharmaceutical industry and trying to make impact for patients in need. And we are so privileged to have currently very good treatment that is offering a lot of value, but we need to think beyond that because this is not the solution for all the therapy areas that we have. And in that context, we are really trying to get innovation from wherever it exists. And certainly, I do believe that Europe has that potential to help us deliver on that innovation. However, if you start to compare, Europe versus the US or China or other regions, there are certain elements that are still important to mature further. And one of those is the entrepreneur mindset. And the entrepreneur mindset in Europe, I have been following for the last maybe 10 years or so. And with the hope that this was going to catch up and maybe get to the point closer to where the US is. But the reality is that it's not, right? And there are maybe different elements as to why is this not happening. And one is probably, the number of investors that come and do investments in Europe is probably not to the magnitude to the US, but it's also the mindset of the academic world in Europe, where you do need to have much more of that entrepreneur spirit to be able to translate. I mean, before we were hearing about basic research versus applied research. And I think these are both interdependent, but I am, from a research perspective and looking into the future where the new treatments will come, I'm really looking to see where are these entrepreneurs. And these entrepreneurs need to have an environment around them that will allow this to nourish, right, to flourish as well. So a combination of funding. Where are the funding bodies that will allow this to happen? A combination of education as well. And then the other part is how is the IP being protected so that all of this can basically be put together and be part of that offering. So from our end in Novo Nordisk, we are really tapping into the innovation wherever it sits by utilizing different business models as well, providing funding at different stages of the idea so that we can help together mature an idea further so that it can reach the patients at some point. All right, so these are quite important, and it's where the technology exists, where the know-how exists, the talent, which is also quite important, but also the surrounding elements so that it can actually be put the ideas together and mature them.
Okay, so one of the topics I think we're going to touch upon in the broader panel discussion is balance between regulation and innovation. And this, of course, has become a particularly hot topic around the revision of the general pharmaceutical legislation. I think there's a sense in some circles that Europe has a tendency towards regulation first with the hope that innovation will follow afterwards. Is this a dynamic that you recognize? Do you think that Europe's on the right track in finding the right balance? And in particular, what would you want from policymakers to create this stronger investment environment for yourself and other actors in the sector?
Yeah, I think it is important to recognize that all the work that goes into early research to be able to deliver new medicines, it requires the support of having a recognition for that innovation and in that protection as well. So the more that we are trying to curtail or reduce the period of time that this protection is happening, the less appealing it's going to become to be putting a lot of effort in this innovation, right? There is a lot of technology that is becoming to life and it's maturing and it's evolving that will allow us to go hopefully faster in this context, but still, it is a significant investment, and that investment, if it's not protected long enough, then why are you going to be making that effort, right? So I don't think necessarily right now it's going in that right direction. I think the more that we hear cutting time into the protection, the regulatory protection, for example, it becomes more challenging.
Very good. Okay, thank you for that. Now, let's move on to industry number 2, and another pretty hot sector, semiconductors. And I mean, you've been following the broader framework program journey, but I mean, also Infineon as a company is 20 years into its own journey, arguably after the spin-off from Siemens. I mean, you're operating in a very interesting space in the sense that Europe is yet again aiming for 20% global market share by 2030. I think they also committed to that about 10 or 15 years ago and failed to deliver. So what needs to change in sectors like yours that have been identified as critical technologies for Europe in the global context? What needs to change to build genuinely competitive value chains across the continent. What do you as a company look for to support that investment in R&D to strengthen the competitiveness of the sector and the company?
I would like to start like this. Don't underestimate the capability of existing companies to transform and make future-proof, because this happens every day, every month. So for my company, I can say that 15 years ago, when this financial and economic crisis started, finally it was not sure that our company can survive at all. So we were, after this crisis, we were a bit smaller than before, and started with around 25,000 people 10 years ago when I joined Infineon. So, and since then, we are growing year over year by 9 to 10% every year. Now we are more than 60,000 people worldwide. Also in Europe, we are also growing in Europe. This is good. But this is an enormous transformation. I would say we have continuously to transform our company, otherwise we would not exist anymore. So this is first. When you think about 20% market share in value of production, which is the precise term in the plan of the European Commission, then it is something different than to think about, are there successful companies, European-based successful companies at all? Because our growth can also happen outside of Europe. So this means that we can have successful companies at the same time we do not increase our market share as Europe. And why is that? Or another view on this might be that if we talk about technological sovereignty of a region like Europe, this is something completely different than to discuss about industrial competitiveness and resilience of an industry or successful companies, because we always have a global view. There is no other way for us to do our business with a global view. And if we would like to bring together both aspects, successful companies and technological sovereignty in Europe, we really have to bring all the stakeholders together to think about that. So, but now if it comes to where do we do our next investments, because we invest really a lot. We invest in Dresden 5 billion for one fab only. Others invest even 10 billion or more for even larger fabs, hopefully in Magdeburg, Intel, or some other investments by TSMC, also in Dresden together with NXP, ST Microelectronics, not ST, it's Bosch and Infineon. But now I named all the 4 large players, ST, NXP, Infineon, and Bosch, strong players in the arena of sensors, microelectromechanical sensors, power electronics. We are world leader there. So, but where do we want to invest next? And there nothing new is in it. This is simply the basic, well-known factors for industry. It's really about the framework conditions on site. Do we have talents? What about the taxation of companies? What about environmental regulations? Can we fulfill the needs there? Then energy access and energy prices. Energy prices are really a major barrier for investments locally, or can be. What about the available digital and physical infrastructure and political certainty? And we have to improve also standardization efforts. these are all the well-known factors for increasing our competitiveness and innovation capability. One more aspect. Grant only will not work. This is what I just explained. However, over the last decades, other regions already subsidized their companies a lot. And this is one of the reasons why Taiwan is now this strong player with these high-end computing chips. Yeah? This was only possible by the way of subsidizing over decades. Therefore, if you would ask me, is the CHIPS Act now the right measure? Yes and no. No, in the sense that we should not neglect the basic factors I mentioned, yeah, because this is something outside of subsidies and CHIPS Act. And yes, in the sense that other regions don't stop to subsidize their industry, and we cannot compete with those regions as Europeans without creating the level playing field on this as well.
Okay, so just to play this a part of this question back to Karen as well before we move on to Robert Jan and Tor. The question of state aid is constantly discussed here in Brussels. Right? You know, to what degree should member states be enabled to invest in critical industries? And again, it's a conversation that tends to get dominated by the aid given to large companies. Right? But it goes beyond that. It goes into the value chain. Right? So it's also state aid for support for SMEs, for scale-up companies and advanced technologies. In your sector, Karen, to what degree are these kinds of instruments really important? Right? How do they factor into R&D strategy and decision-making?
Well, I think, it is putting all the pieces together at the end that will make the appeal in a case, right? So it's on the one hand, the universities, how are they creating the talent, how are the talent pool that will be, delivering on the innovation from the research, for example, but then it's also those facilities or those structures that will allow you to do further down the value chain, into clinical development, for example. Do we have the right means and the right path and an easy path to be able to get there fast and to be able to answer the initial questions that we have to move forward? And then if you move from there, it's also now the conversations that we have around positioning and bringing a product to the market for to the patients, right? So it's all throughout that we're seeking for a path that it's, the path of least resistance at the end, right? And then in this context as well is where can we go to generate the answers faster? Because the faster that we are able to provide these answers to the potential products that we bring, the better we're all going to be, right? It's faster, it's cheaper, and then at the end of the day, you can also do something better when it comes to the patients. So I think it's across the value chain that it's important. And then if the one additional aspect is on the manufacturing piece, right? So if the manufacturing also, it's allowing you to have the right competencies, the right skills, the right setup, then it's also facilitating the path. So it's all along that it's important, and it's creating, again, the value chain that it will work.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'm very glad you mentioned the production aspect, because it's something that we talked about in some of our prep calls. So I'm going to plug this into the next question to Robert Jan. I mean, Robert Jan, you have an almost unique profile, right, in that you've spent years and years inside the system, right, of trying to align the broad parameters and the long-term objectives of R&I policy and strategy with various other strategic goals at European level, including industrial strategy, competitiveness, regional development, and more. So when you look to the future, whether in the context of the design of FP10, but I think at a broader level, what do you think Europe can do, or member states or regions, to address the concerns or the issues raised by Karen and Ina? What do you see as the potential interventions to strengthen this value proposition including production, not just R&D, right? But the value chains in Europe to attract the investments of the future.
You have a couple of hours or not?
Are you staying for lunch?
Let me first of all thank Science Business for celebrating 40 years framework program, because this is really something unique which we have established in Europe. 40 years of cooperation, 40 years of networking, and it has really contributed to strengthening the competitiveness of European industry, but also to finding solutions for the grand societal challenges we are facing. And of course, the system is not perfect, but we've come a long way. I remember very well that Philips Electronics once told me 40 years ago, they had no idea when they were looking for knowledge, new knowledge, where to go to in Europe, because it was not transparent to markets. We went to the United States. I think thanks to the framework programs, we have made the market of knowledge transparent. You know exactly where to go for the right knowledge. We have fostered a lot of cooperation programs, so I think we've come a long way. Now the partnerships which have been established, so I'm very proud of what the European Commission has been able to establish. If you ask me, yes, Simon, what is one of the biggest challenges, and that is not a new challenge, that was always for Brussels or within Brussels, what I would call integrated policy making. What do I mean with that? That the other policies of the European Union are aligned to the innovation policy. And let me give an example. You can pump a lot of money into pharmaceutical research, which the European Union is doing through the framework program, Innovative Health Initiative. But if the regulatory framework is not following suit, you know, this money is going down the drain. And you can put a lot of money into making your crop sector, agriculture sector, very efficient. But if at the same time CRISPR-Cas9 is not allowed to be rolled out, you know, this money is going down the drain. You can plead for more strong innovators, consortia, even, you know, companies getting together like we have with Airbus. And if then competition policy is not allowing Siemens and Alstom to merge, then you can't create the scale and scope you would like to have. So I think one of the biggest challenges, and I hope really that the high-level expert group, which is now starting to look at the next framework program, will put its teeth into that, is to have much more integrated policy making, because else you are not optimizing all the investments you put in innovation. And we hear here strong examples of that, where integrated policy making is not happening, and because of that we are facing a problem. So I can give you another example, biorefineries. This was a big issue a couple of years ago, but in order, and the framework program put a lot of money into that, but in order to have a biorefinery in your country, you need to have scale and scope, meaning you need a lot of agricultural waste to put into the biorefinery. Well, agricultural waste could not be exported across borders. So suppose you want to build a biorefinery in Luxembourg, small country, which does not have enough agricultural waste. If you can't import from other countries, you can't build your biorefineries. Well, it's these type of examples which show that we need to really move to more integrated policy making, where we put the innovation and industrial competitiveness at the core, and the other policies in support of that.
Yes, Karen, go ahead. And I have a follow-up from Rob.
Because I really like the fact that how you're calling it the integration, the integrated piece. And I actually have an analogy as to how we look at in research and in the therapy areas. And the whole integrative or holistic view is quite important from my angle. But as I hear you, I can see how this is also quite important, because people are just looking in silos at their individual area and so on, and really fail to see the bigger picture and how are the bottlenecks that will be created downstream, and not really paying attention to that. So I think it is quite important to have that holistic view, and I wonder how much is really happening versus everybody working in their own little area.
It's changed a lot now. I think it's changed a lot in the last couple of years because of the European, strategic autonomy discussion, but also very concrete leadership, for instance, by Thierry Breton. He is now completely reviewing the European standardization process, because he wants that we are extremely selective where we invest in standard setting, where Europe takes a lead role, because where we need for our competitiveness or for our sovereignty really set the global standards, like we did in the past on numerous occasions. So I think that the things have changed, and I see very much now at the European Commission, amongst commissioners, a willingness indeed to be much more have much more the policies integrated, the alignment of policies, as I mentioned, but really base it on Europe's competitiveness and Europe's future. So I'm quite optimistic there.
Okay, so I'm going to challenge that optimism with, again, a perennial challenge that we talk about in Brussels and beyond. It's kind of the inverted bell curve, right? So on the top in the left, you have EU setting long-term strategic goals to 2040, 2050. In the middle, you have member states working to 3, 4, 5-year political cycles. And then at the level of regions, I think also of Eindhoven, right, you have a long-term development strategy. So two parts of this are quite well aligned and connected. The political mess in the middle makes it, I think, very difficult to achieve this integration. Do you think I'm right in saying that? Or do you think that there's more hope for getting a coherent long-term plan for European, across sectors and at different levels of innovation versus?
Yeah. Well, I'm there quite optimistic. Take the area where I'm from, Eindhoven, the heart of semicon of the Netherlands. Companies like ASML, NXP, and Demcon, many more, you know them, where we are developing in that region, in that innovation ecosystem, a very strong strategy with the university, the Eindhoven University of Technology, and the high-tech industry. But it is coupled into a national semicon strategy. And that is, of course, very much coupled into the European strategy. So I see there very much an alignment between the regional, the national, and the European level. And the semicon example is a nice one. The same what you are doing with Infineon at the moment in Germany. The big investments is an alignment of the region in Germany, Magdeburg, with the national strategy, of course, coupled into European project, IPSAI type initiative. So, no, I see there a lot of positive developments, but it, of course, requires that players, political players, are taking their responsibility and show leadership.
Okay, good. We're going to ask the room what they think in a couple of minutes. But first I'm going to turn
You're
to
convinced,
Tor.
Simon, I hope.
What's that?
You're convinced, Simon,
No. Do you have 2 days? No, we'll pick up on this a little later. It's a topic that's going to come back a little later in the conference as well in other sessions. But Tor, NTNU is, again, a very strong traditional performer in EU framework programs, also in the context of Norwegian industrial strategy, the transformation beyond or the move away from fossil fuel-based industries and so forth. But I think given the focus that your organization has on working very closely with industry on research commercialization, on knowledge valorization, etc., do you have the impression that here in Europe we have the instruments and the policies that we need to ensure that corporate R&D investments in Europe are properly commercialized, that they ultimately reach society and deliver the impact that the investment intends to achieve when it's made? What's your take on this whole question of valorization, commercialization, and impact?
First of all, thanks for giving me the opportunity to be here in the panel today. I would like to draw actually one really important take-home message this morning, and that is to not making two silos between basic and applied research. I think you have to basically have the whole knowledge value chain, or maybe the spiral, so to speak, is that you have to be sure that you have a balance and looking at or fostering the whole value chain, so to speak. You mentioned entrepreneurship and talent as one of the main outcome of the science. I think it's important also in order to answer that question, to not trying to make a borderline between applied and basic research. I think that's a really important fundamental issue related to also to have the right number of talent in Europe, and also to increase the entrepreneurial spirit within the research community, particularly, of course, during the students and the education system. So then I think it's important to address that knowledge valorization is one way to make sure that also the autonomy and the resilience in the European continent will increase in the years to come. And there, of course, I think the entrepreneurial spirit or to foster that would be one of the key issues related to knowledge valorization. So you have to strengthen, there are some instruments, and you have to look into the instruments and so on. But I think maybe the most important thing is to develop a culture for knowledge valorization or entrepreneurship.
So within that context, Tor, I mean, how can that be better reflected into the science to business partnership model? Right. I mean, we're going to have some discussion. Well, there are parallel discussions going on around the pre-competitive collaborative R&D landscape. We had a couple of references earlier in the opening plenary to the importance of giving young researchers exposure to industry needs, to really understanding what the long-term thinking is for business. How do we ensure that it's not just left to the universities or the laboratories to somehow develop and incubate this entrepreneurial spirit? How does the system as a whole potentially adapt and adjust so that we end up with a new generation?
I think it's the responsibility also of the universities. We have introduced at our university in Eindhoven what we call challenge-based learning. That means that each student goes through so-called student teams, where with students from different departments, they work on a challenge, often defined by industry. And that teaches these students to become a different type of engineer. Because the companies, certainly in our region, they ask a completely different type of engineer 20 years ago. They now ask an engineer who can be problem solving, who can work in a team, and can communicate. And that's not your typical engineer from 20 years ago. So I think it's a challenge also for universities to make sure that the curriculum and what they teach is very much aligned with what the companies need. And things have moved on. And that's why universities should get out of their silo and dialogue with industry, because industry knows exactly what type of people it would like to get.
Do you? I'm coming to you in a minute. Do you know exactly who you want?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. I believe that for sure the university has a big role, but also there is an opportunity to do this more in collaboration with industry, and not just so much by industry defining, for example, what is the problem at hand that the students can solve, but it's also by providing maybe some in-kind trainings. Because, for example, I can tell you that right now I am looking to have much more of what I call bilingual profiles. And maybe it's not only bilingual when it comes to biology and digital, but maybe it's also trilingual. I don't know if that the engineering part comes. But this is something that needs to be nurtured since the beginning, where you're having, outside of the silos, the engineering school versus the I don't know, nutritional or whatever other area, where you put them together, and that's when the magic happens. Right? So rather than waiting for those interactions to happen when you are at the working place, what kind of opportunities are there to introduce this collaboration across sectors, across in areas of knowledge that happen so early that this starts to foster some of that creativity, right? But it's a combination. I think from the industry side, certainly, when I talked about this entrepreneur spirit and so on, it's also about for students to be able to realize that there is a path. When there is an idea, that idea can be commercialized, and when I say commercialized, it's basically applied, right? That there is a way to do it, and there are many more people out in industry willing to have a conversation, and doesn't have to be via a formal interaction with a particular industry itself. Right?
Fantastic, thank you. Now, you get the chance next. Start thinking, 2 minutes, but Tor, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
I think the key here is that you have to expose the students to different perspectives. I think one is to bring the industry or which brings probably the problems to be solved. But I think also interdisciplinarity needs, for example, for the twin transition. You have to understand a broader perspective than only the industrial perspective, so to speak. I think also that I just heard recently that training engineers was problem solving. I heard now recently that maybe it's more important to train the engineer to find the problems, actually, not necessarily only solving them. So meaning that the education has to and I think also the students need to see where the frontier research is. So expose them to everything and don't build silos between all these things into the education system. Then we would have the talent which Europe needs.
Perhaps one reaction to that as well. You mentioned indeed companies not defining or telling universities what to do. I think that's absolutely important. And the clever companies, they don't do that. A company like ASML, doesn't tell our university, do this type of research. On the contrary, they say, listen, don't try to do the research on the EUV machine, which you never can do better than us, but you come with the most bizarre, out-of-the-box thinking and ideas, because we know that one day will kill us or make us. An example is, of course, Nokia, which did not see at all the iPhone coming. So the clever companies, they ask universities and the research at universities to completely do out-of-the-box thinking, because that will lead to the breakthroughs, which will make their future or break their future.
Very good. Sorry, one last comment, Ina? Yeah.
But at a certain point in time, you have to bring together both aspects, yeah?
Yeah.
So, and this is really then the art of working together. And this is what we also need from our young colleagues to do that better than in the past.
Great, thank you. So that's covered the human capital. Now, do we have any questions, comments, criticisms, challenges? Anybody who would like to intervene? Yes, we have a gentleman here at the front. We'll just bring the microphone quickly up. Thank you very much. And if you could just quickly introduce yourself, and let's keep the questions or comments quite concise.
Thank you. Patrick McCutcheon from IP Europe, an industry association, companies that invest heavily in R&D, rather like the pharma sector, the two R&D intensive sectors. My comment is to unfortunately add to the list of issues that Robert Jan mentioned. The IP policy of the Commission is undermining investments in R&D. It affects both the high-tech sector and the pharma sector. The question is how to ensure that IP policy, which in theory is part of innovation policy, isn't undermining investments in innovation.
Very good. Thank you, Patrick. And do we have another question that we'd like to take? Okay, we have one here, just in front.
Yes, hello. My name is Jose Jimenez. I'm in the European Commission in DG Climate for the time being. In the past, of course, in the research with Robert Jan Smith and others, also for many years. My question is, of course, Robert Jan already highlighted the need to integrate policies to make things happen altogether in a consistent way, and it was clearly accepted by the representatives of the industry. But on top of that, I mean, my question is, in the past, I'm in FP for many years, FP3, FP4 already, and I remember in the past we have a big effort on dissemination of results to make research and innovation results come to the market, have the impact that they need to have. We have even a value program 30 years ago, you may remember that as well. Anyway, that's all the story. Now my question is, do we still need to do anything else to make sure that research and innovation results reach the impact and the market that they are intended for? Or should we leave this to, possibly as it was hinted a bit, to industries to know where research is there, go and pick it up? It's happening, of course, even if we don't intervene. Industries will find the research and will get it and will implement it. But do we still need to do something else to promote this in particular? And in particular, just I cannot avoid saying it, I'm in DG Clima now, this is what they pay me for, and 35% of the whole Horizon Europe budget is spent on climate and energy research, which has also been highlighted as one of the critical drivers for the whole innovation thing. So there, what can we do as well to make sure that there is a connection between research and innovation and make the transition happen anyway? It's a broad question, but thank you for it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jose. So, Ina, Karin, perhaps if you'd like to take the first question from Patrick about the alignment of IP frameworks, regime protocols, and innovation, how to find a right or effective balance moving forward.
Yeah, with regard to IP, I have not the closest look from my side to explain how it developed over the years. So there I'm less experienced than you are, likely. Therefore, I would fully support, of course, that we have to have a look at it, because otherwise collaborations cannot bring the best results finally. And if I look at it from my perspective, I'm really an expert for the collaboration projects also. Then I see often that we even avoid working together in certain cases with other players because of the IP management behind. And if we don't expect that we finally can use the IP or can create IP and use it, then why should we then cooperate? Yeah, so then it's a hurdle for collaboration if it's not the right IP management behind. Also on national level, yeah, when you try to make the best out of R&D, let's say from applied research. You work together with, or we work together with Fraunhofer institutes quite often, but the transfer is not an easy thing if it comes to IP contracts or the IP part of our collaboration contracts. And we really rethink again and again how we can improve this value chain, so to say, because it's finally industry creating the market and delivering to the markets. Yeah, it is not the research organization, and it should not be. This is, normally it will not be.
Karen, any thoughts from your side?
Yes, I think it is important to define since the beginning what is the purpose of a collaboration. And I think the part of the challenge of this IHI or IMI in the previous version of it is that being pre-competitive keeps the questions and the collaboration at a level that is really difficult to extract value. So if there was an opportunity to really define a bit more what is the translatability of the question and then potential commercialization, then the extraction of the value would be much, much easier. But then it comes back also when the IP, as how the IP situation is different from different institutions as well. So if we take Sweden, for example, where the IP actually belongs to the investigator rather than the university, that as an incentive for the investigators is actually quite different. Right? So I think this is another element to keep in mind as to what is the intention, what is the framework around it that will allow for this to be more translatable down the road. And then the value extraction. And also the last thing to say is that for this to actually materialize, there has to be a win-win situation on both ends. And sometimes I do feel that in this context of pre-competitive, people come with very different agendas. And when the different agendas are on the table, then it's very difficult to make it, to get the best value out of it, rather than everybody just trying to get a piece,
Understood. Okay.
Perhaps, what Patrick is saying proves once again the importance of integrated policymaking, where you put really at the core the innovation policy and make sure that all other policies of the European Union, whether it's in the field of standardization or in the field of IP or in the field of pharmaceutical or medication or in the field of whatever, that they are really in support of the European innovation policy. And your example shows indeed that we have an issue there as well, that the IP policy, as it is being developed at the moment, is not necessarily supporting the innovation approach. Jose, I think you asked a good question about the dissemination of results. There used to be in the past, in the old framework program, a very artificial, policy on disseminating results. And under Horizon 2020, I think a more natural policy was developed, whereby besides research, there was also the possibility to finance uptake, proof of concept, first of a kind, even pilot lines, demonstrators. And that led to, indeed, as was said by Rich Hodson this morning, that the industry came back into the framework program during Horizon 2020, because that was exactly the way to make sure that the results would not just stay in a lab, but they could be indeed deployed. And of course, pilot lines, first of kind, proof of concept, are ideal mechanism for that. They have not been used to the extent that I would have liked to see that. I think we can do much more, but that is the best way to ensure uptake.
Great, thank you. Now, Tor, also when we talked before the conference, this was one of the issues that you flagged, the fragmentation within the European system, the difficulties of knowledge diffusion. And actually in one of our workshops yesterday, when we talked about innovation challenges in Europe, one recommendation was that basically all non-IP linked or constrained outputs or outcomes from Horizon-funded research should be made publicly available in some kind of meta-repository, also as a potential incentive to bring companies back. So if there are no IP implications on what you deliver from an EU-funded initiative, the information should be out there for the broader community to see what they can do with it. So how would you answer this question about dissemination and use of results?
I think it's already been commented on, and I fully agree with that. But I think it's also important to to link dissemination with the word impact. How do you what will be the impact of the result coming out of the? And I think it's important then, of course, to mature this further on. But again, I think also in order to make sure that that research are still actual or has a value, you need to really focus on what's coming out. So I think dissemination is, but I think it has been maturing from the previous framework programs to being more targeted now than it used to be.
And let's not forget that a lot of dissemination takes place through publications. Yeah, I mean, certainly when they go into open access,
And for education.
my favorite topic, then of course, it spreads the knowledge.
Can I add one last thing here? Because, through the different collaborations around the IMI, IHI, for example, around topics like obesity with Sophia, or Rhapsody for diabetes, there is a lot of knowledge created. But then maybe now it's changing. But in the past, it was you generate a database, and then the database is no longer sustainable. And there is so much knowledge that gets lost because there is no further support for that. And then you need to go around and try to say, okay, who's going to support this and that so that we can keep it live? So this is another big part that needs to be incorporated. How are we doing data management, and how are we being able to create a repository to really put everything there but keep it sustainable? Because otherwise, it goes away, and then that knowledge either needs to be recreated or rather than be built upon. Right? So I think the data piece and the data protection is also something that needs to be ironed out. Because if we continue to put hurdles on this, it's just not going to be allowing us to advance with the data and the knowledge that is already created and it's existing, and building upon that.
Great. I have one last quick question for you, right, which is also about closing the loop on the history of FP and thinking about the future. As Marilyn mentioned in the opening plenary, Etienne Davignon, back in '84, got 12 very big companies around the table to talk to them about the future of R&D in Europe. Today, when we talk about the future, it's on the back of huge commission consultations that get thousands of responses with very, very diluted perspectives, unless you have very strong advocates within the system who are going to promote a particular point of view. What's the right balance when we come to FP10? Where should industry be given a seat at the table to inform or to help the Commission think through the design of the framework programme so that it delivers this win-win situation for industry, for research and for society? Robert Jan, maybe you'd like to go first on this. Should we go back to inviting a select group of companies to sit at the table and talk about the future?
I think that should in any case happen, that everyone is involved in this shaping of the next framework program. There's the high-level group, and if you look at the composition, there's representatives from industry there, from society, from academia. So I think that will anyhow be, I think, a natural process. I think one thing we have to be extremely careful about is that we go back to the old days where we had a framework program which we thought was good for everything. It was good for societal challenges, was good for competitiveness, was good for SMEs, was good for... That's why the structure as it is now, which was started on Horizon 2020, is very much based on 3 pillars. Who sets the agenda? There is the pillar excellent research, where the only one who sets the agenda is the researcher. And that's, of course, the ERC as main mechanism. The second pillar is very much about societal challenges, where it is the politicians who set the challenge. We want to have an energy transition, and companies, universities get together to sort it out. And then the third one is, of course, the pillar where industry sets the agenda with regard to competitiveness, in the field of aeronautics, for instance. And so we have to, I think, very much stick to that structure, because if we go back to the old structure, we think we solve problems for everyone, and we solve no problem whatsoever.
Very good. That's an excellent note on which to finish. So we need to prepare for the next sessions. So we're going to just remind you quickly that the following session will be with DSW and cooperation in health with the Global South. The other 2 parallel sessions will be back downstairs, right, in the basement level. And so I'd like you to just end by thanking the speakers, appreciating their contributions, Karin, Ina, Robert, Jan, and Tor. Thank you to our online audience for joining this session, and we look forward to continuing the dialogues in just a few minutes. So please make your way